Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's been a minute, but we are here for the North American Challengers Open Qualifiers #1. Yeah, I'm very excited to get back into the season. Now, obviously, the main event isn't going to start for a while. I'll go ahead and pull up the VLR for you all right now, and this is the main event. The open qualifiers initially appeared on the VLR. I'm not sure if they'll be put back on it, but for right now, they are only on the Battle 5 for whatever reason right now. So yeah, if you want to see the bracket, they did post it on Twitter down here. And you can go to pks.gg/bracket if you want to look at it yourself. But for right now, we are just in the open qualifiers. The first one, um, the idea is 128 teams. They didn't end up getting that number, so there's a lot of it's called bye rounds. So basically, one team doesn't have to face an opponent; they sort of just get to move on. Sometimes, both teams get a bye round into the second round. So I'm not sure if both round 1 and round 2 will be starting at the same time, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case. Although they may just do round 1 initially. So I'm definitely looking forward to this. There's quite a few teams that I've managed to see throughout the past year, and so I've got a few teams on my eye for sure that I'm looking at coming into this season. So yeah, I'll talk about the way that it's going to work. So I did post a video, but I'll go ahead and briefly go over it once again. So yeah, so we do have 5 spots are going to be up for grabs between the 2 open qualifiers. 3 spots will be decided in open qualifier #1, and the remaining 2 spots will be solidified in open qualifier #2. So that means that open qualifier #1 is going to have more opportunities. Open qualifier #2 is going to have slightly less, so it's going to be a bit more difficult. Now both qualifiers are going to run in a double elimination format. But it's first going to start with the stage 1, and that stage 1 will be single elimination. So today in just a few minutes, the start of the round of 128 is going to begin. After that, we have the round of 64. That will create the final 32 teams, at which point the double elimination bracket will start tomorrow, and it'll start at the same time, and that will that will determine the teams that are in the quarterfinals and that make it through, or sorry, not the quarterfinals, but they'll make it through the quarterfinals to the semifinals, and the teams that are in the lower bracket. I can show you guys all of this right here, so you can sort of see this is a bit tentative because what they're going to do is obviously we've got the round of 128, 64, and then all of the teams that end up right here will move on to the double elimination part. Battlefy is a bit weird in the way that you can set up your tournament brackets, so it's not going to let them do it exactly how they might want to, unlike the way VLR might function. So it's gonna be a bit rough just starting out, but for the most part, that's the format, right? 32 teams make it towards tomorrow, and then over the course of the next 2 days, they will narrow it down. So if you make it to the semifinals, sorry, and you end up winning and you make it to the grand finals, that does mean that you have qualified. So you don't have to win the grand finals, at least not in this one. In the next one, you will have to win the grand finals. But in this one, you do not have to win the grand finals in order to qualify. You just have to get to the grand finals, and you'll be able to qualify. Or you can make it through the lower bracket, which will be finished up on the 3rd, so in 2 days. And that will, if you're able to get through the lower bracket, all you have to do is make it through all of the rounds and then into the finals of the lower bracket, and you will be able to qualify to challengers. So obviously, double elimination means that you have 2 chances. So if you get knocked out of the upper bracket, then you get to go down to the lower bracket. And then you can try and fight your way through the lower bracket to get a win. But considering the upper bracket will have 2 qualifying teams and the lower bracket only has 1, it's going to be a bit more difficult. And then, obviously, qualifier #2 is not going to start for a few more days, in a few weeks. But it's following a similar format. So the round of 128 on day 1, round of 64 as well, and then the final 32 teams will proceed into stage 2 for day 2. Just like this one, except it goes a little bit differently. So the winner of the upper finals is the one that ends up qualifying. So before you just had to make it to the upper finals and you qualify. With this one, you do have to win them in order to qualify. So it's going to be a little bit of a tougher fight. And then the lower round 1 winner is going to be the team, or not the lower round 1, but the lower bracket winner is going to be the other team that qualifies. Now, I do believe that there's going to be another team, so another opportunity to qualify for Challengers North America will be from competing in Premier. To earn a spot in Challengers North America, teams will need to qualify for the Contenders Premier playoffs. Teams that qualify will compete against the at-risk teams and challengers to steal their spot and promote at Challengers Promotion and Relegation Tournament. I don't know if that means you're going to be able to compete in this year's, or if it means like at the end, because what happened at the end of last year's season, which I can recap really quickly, if I pull it up. What happened at the end of last year's season is there was a relegation tournament, or a relegation bracket rather, where the bottom 4 teams competed for a spot in this year's challengers, and 2 teams did not make it through that. So Disguise and Mad Lions did get eliminated from that, and that does mean, and that does mean that they have to play in the playoffs this year if they want to compete. Disguised, of course, is not, and I don't think Mad Lions is either. But they could have done that, right, if they wanted to compete in this year's. So I'm wondering if that's what's going to happen. Is like at the end of the season, there's going to be a play-in relegation tournament, or not tournament, but bracket with those challengers, premier or not challengers teams, but with some of the challengers teams, like the bottom few challengers teams, and the premier winners. We'll see. I don't know exactly how it's going to function. It'll be interesting to see the way that that is incorporated. Another thing to note is if a team wants to compete in challengers, all of their players, whether it's the open qualifiers or the main event, all of their players need to have the contender status in Premier, which basically just means you're high enough rank and you've participated in a little bit of Premier. You don't need to be, your team doesn't need to be a contender status. It just needs to be each of your players, so they could do it on their own with other people. It doesn't really matter. But regardless, that's pretty much as I believe we know so far. So it's going to be pretty exciting. Obviously, I'm not entirely sure how many teams are going to be qualifying from where. Here you can see we've already got the 6 teams from last year minus a few. So last year, the all of these teams in theory move on. So that would be TSM, Shopify, G2, FaZe Clan, Oxygen, Moist Moguls, The Guard, and M80. However, obviously the Guard qualified, so that's not a factor. And Moist and Shopify combined into one team, so that sort of knocked out one of the teams. So I believe, or Shopify or Moist has another spot. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to function. It also says that there's going to be 4 teams qualifying through the open qualifier, but then on the article it only says there's 3 coming through the open qualifier. So I don't. There's still a lot of still a lot of question marks, I think, in my eyes, as far as how it's actually gonna go. So we'll see where it does end up heading. Yeah. This is still as far as we know. If I had to speculate, I'd say because Moist and Shopify have combined into one team, that means that Shopify has lost their spot. And the reason I think that is because I believe, let me see if I can find it. I believe Shopify is competing in this bracket. We'll see, because they were talking about it. Shopify has a Game Changers bracket, or not Game Changers bracket, Game Changers team, and this team is not competing under the Game Changers label anymore. It's just competing under Shopify Rebellion, because Shopify does not have a separate roster from the Moist Shopify roster, and because they are competing in this one, that makes me think that Shopify dropped out. So if I had to guess, there's actually like 7 teams that have moved on, and something like that. And I'm not entirely sure how it works. Um, so we'll just see where it all ends up landing. Obviously, VLR is kind of weird sometimes because um, especially for the challengers and VCT circuits, they put a lot of stuff in advance and before everything's super clarified. And so I'm not entirely sure exactly how that's going to end up landing. Um, what we do know is obviously it's going to start on March 19th, so that's quite a ways away. That's in um, almost 2 months. It's going to be midway through March, so we still got quite a bit of time. So right now it's just the qualifiers, and then there's going to be a month in between the end of the qualifiers and the start of the main event. So we don't need to worry about this too much, other than at least there's going to be two more challengers teams from last year, and then maybe it's going to be something like this that we see here. I'm not. I'm not entirely sure. Um, but the stream has not started yet, so really quickly I'll go over some of the teams I'm looking at that I've been able to see. So if you don't know, over the course of the past year, obviously I started by just live streaming the Challengers 2023. I started during the main event, not the qualifiers, just doing it here. And after a while of doing that, I did start doing actual casting for different organizers. Obviously wasn't for challengers, wasn't for Knights Arena, not yet at least. But I was able or not compete, to cast for a lot of different organizers. Sorry, my brain's all over the place right now. And so I've seen a lot of teams in the tier 3 and even a few in the tier 2 space. I was able to cast for Project Alliance when they had X set. Their Game Changers team was playing in that tournament. So I've seen some of the better tier 2 teams, but I've also seen a lot of the tier 3 teams. Because if you don't know, there's 3 different tiers essentially for Valorant competition. So in tier 1, you have things like VCT, so that's going to be Valorant Americas, VCT Pacific, VCT China, VCT EMEA. So that's where like Sentinels and G2 now, and Crew, Leviathan, Loud, all of those teams are in that tier 1 space. And then tier 2 is things like challengers. So the tier 2 in Valorant means you might be able to compete in tier 1 if you make it far enough. So if you win challengers, you make it to Ascension, and if you win the Ascension tournament, then you qualify or ascend into that tier 1 space. Which is pretty big. That's the end goal, and so that's what everyone in tier 2 is sort of competing for. Collegiate, I would say, is also sort of in that tier 2 space as well. It's just sort of a different style. It's just a completely separate sort of thing going on. And then over on the other side, you do have tier 3, and so a lot of these teams are tier 3 teams that are trying to make their way into tier 2. Because that's the goal, right? You don't want to just be a team that spends the entire time in tier 3. So that's sort of where we're at. We're sort of looking at a lot of these teams as teams that are trying to become tier 2 teams. But I have had the pleasure of being able to cast some matches for a few of these teams. So I've seen Rise play quite a few times. I've been a part of, although I have had to take a short break from Titans of Tier 3, which is a Tier 3 tournament organizer that has quite a few higher level teams. I've seen some pretty good players, and so Rise is one of those teams. We've got Cataclysm Gaming in here. Shopify Rebellion was not in any of the tier 3 events I was casting, but they were under the previous name of version 1 GC, or it was just version 1, but that was a Game Changers roster that made it pretty deep into Game Changers 2023, and they made it to Game Changers Champions, so that's the international Game Changers event. And then Shopify decided to just buy the team because version 1 was looking to sell it. And that became the Shopify Rebellion team, and that is now the team that ended up winning champions, and now they're coming into challengers. And unfortunately, you could win Game Changers champions and you get literally nothing. Unfortunately, you still have to go through the Game Changers qualifiers. You still have to go through the challengers qualifiers. I think maybe there should be a little bit more of a reward than just look at this thing you did. But that's I guess that's just Riot Games, right? So Shopify does have to compete here, but they're definitely a very solid and well put together team. They do play a little bit weirdly. They don't, go for the meta compositions you typically see teams go for. So that could be an interesting watch for sure. And then moving down, you're gonna see things like Chosen Ones. I've been able to see Zero Marksman Black. I've been able to see um, the just quite a few different teams that I've been able to see. I'm gonna look for any more just that way I know which ones I'm looking at as well. Um, yeah, Cataclysm. Cataclysm is very well put together team. They've been competing in Titans of Tier 3 as well. I've also casted for the organization themselves for a pretty big tournament, the Lux tournament, Lux Invitational, which was a big Tier 3 tournament that I was able to cast for. So that was cool. But that was Cataclysm was one of the people hosting that, so I got to cast for them. Their team wasn't in it, but I was casting for them. It was a little bit weird. Teddy Tactics is a GC team, so they're definitely one of those teams you can look at. I think I've casted for them when they were in the I am struggling to remember. Tactifriends. I think they were in the Tactifriends tournament potentially. There were two of those that I casted, and since then, Tactifriends is no longer an organization. But I think there's a chance I casted for them then. Teddy Tactics has a lot of players that sort of like rotate in and out, so there's never like one. Um, there's never like one solid team staying together. So I'm probably going to see players I don't recognize on the team if I do get to see them if they make it far enough. Go further down. YFP I've been able to see play here and there, and that's pretty much it. So I've seen a few. There's some I haven't seen. I'm really just looking forward to seeing all of the teams really because I'm looking forward to seeing how many of these teams are going to be interesting to watch who I haven't seen before. Because if I haven't seen these teams before, that means they're either collegiate teams or they're not playing in the tier 2 space, which is interesting. Or sorry, tier 3 space, which is interesting. So I'm definitely interested to see where they do end up heading with their teams. But it does look like that's pretty much where we are right now. We don't have a stream starting up. I'm assuming it's going to be on this one, but it could be on the Knights Arena. Like a Knights Arena page, like right here. But I'm following all of these, I guess, and they're not live right now. So hopefully at least one of them starts to come up. But for right now, I was sort of just assuming it was. Let me see if I can find it. It's gonna be like this. There we go. So I'm assuming it's gonna pop up here. Again, but I don't know that for sure. Just because this is usually where they host it, and I don't know why they wouldn't. But since you do have a little bit of time, I will go ahead and uh, give a brief recap of how last year's went. Since you do still have some time to kill. So if you missed it, if you did miss last year, or this is your first year watching, after a pretty lengthy qualifier, there were 12 teams that ended up being in challengers. So this was the first year of franchising was last year. And so there were defined teams in tier 1, and then there were teams that were directly invited to the tier 2 space or to challengers. And then there were a few teams that ended up qualifying through. So OR Esports, Mad Lions, Disguised, Turtle Troop, Moist Moguls, and I believe Oxygen all had to play their way through the open qualifiers, and they made their way there. After a very lengthy split one, a few teams did not qualify for the mid-season invitational. Those teams were Turtle Troop, Shopify Rebellion, Mad Lions, and OR Esports. All of the other teams made it through to the mid-season face-off. This was essentially the playoffs bracket, but you're just playing for circuit points instead of and money instead of the potential to go to relegation or not relegation, ascension. So that's it's sort of just like a practice bracket, almost a bit of a show bracket to really show what these teams have halfway through the tournament. And then this was going to start a little bit of a break before split 2. as well. So that's sort of what that was for. And the team that ended up taking it was M80, and it was by a pretty substantial margin. The whole time G2 was sort of fighting. I think G2 was one of those teams that was on the cusp. A lot of teams saw them as and I saw them as sort of like they were there, but they weren't doing a whole lot. Yeah, so M80, the guard, and I think G2 were sort of those teams who were looking at maybe Oxygen. And then coming into Split 2, there was a massive, I would say upset a little bit, where Moist Moguls came through as the underdogs and ended up getting first place going into the playoffs. So they got first place in Split 2, which means they got a lot of circuit points, which means they got a really good seed going into Split 2. And then there were some teams that just didn't quite make the cut, and those were Turtle Troop, OR Esports, Mad Lions, and Disguise. Turtle Troop did well enough that I think had their Split 1 gone better, they would have probably made it to the playoffs. They were definitely a very good team, and so I'm going to be excited to see them playing in the main event of this year. But we didn't quite get to see them play, unfortunately, in the playoffs. So yeah, Turtle Troop, Disguised, OR Esports, and Mad Lions didn't make it through. There was a play-in relegation tournament halfway through the playoffs, like right smack dab in the middle. And this one didn't go that way for Mad Lions and Disguised. Turtle Troop swept through to load both matches, so they were pretty confident and made it through to this year. They've swapped out some players since, but they are still looking like a very solid team. Meanwhile, you've got Mad Lions in Disguise, of course, not making it, and OR did make it through. They did get 2-0'd by Turtle Troop, made it down to the decider match, had a hard-fought match with Mad Lions, but they did qualify, so that was definitely exciting to see. And then we went into the playoffs. In the playoffs, this was the big chance. Whichever team made it to the grand finals would qualify for Ascension. You didn't have to win the grand finals. You just had to make it to the grand finals. Top 2 teams qualified for Ascension and a chance to make it to Tier 1. So this is very, very exciting. And a lot of teams were not as excited and were not doing it quite as well as you might hope. So TSM did not perform that well. Shopify did not perform that well either. They both ended up getting out. Now, if you did make it to, I should say, if you made it to the playoffs, you got a free spot into this year's Challengers. So that was nice. So all of these teams would have a second chance. And any team that didn't qualify to Ascension would also, or not to Ascension, any team that lost in Ascension would also have a free spot here, and one of the teams did lose. But obviously, you come through here, and M80 ended up taking it. Moist Moguls, I really confidently believe, right? They 2-0'd the guard. I was really sure in thinking that Moist Moguls would make it to the grand finals. I really thought they were going to go to Ascension, and they sort of just dropped the ball. I'm not quite sure what happened, but they sort of just fell and couldn't really pick themselves back up. They got 3-0'd by the guard in the lower finals, and it wasn't super close. I mean, it was 13-10, 14-12, 13-8. But when it's a 3-0, like, you can say like some of the maps were close, but if you look at the series as a whole, that's just not. It's not a close series, right? It's not exactly as close as you would hope. And so a bit disappointing of a finish from Moist Moguls. So I'm looking at them this year as another one of those teams I'm excited to see. But you did see the Guard end up taking it. So the Guard and M80 went to VCT America's Ascension 2023. So this was big. Whichever team won would make it to the Tier 1 space. And it was a really short group stage. I believe there were only 6 matches played or something like that. Or no, it wasn't 6. Each team played 2 matches. Yeah, so they were 2 groups, 3 teams per group. You were only playing the teams in your group, and it was just each team playing the other 2 teams in their group. So it's a bit chaotic. The Guard ended up 2-0ing. The Union ended up 2-0ing in their group. And this wasn't for anything. You weren't going to get knocked out of the tournament. You were just it was just seedings for playoffs, basically. So after the group stage, playoffs started. The team that wins the grand final moves on. Fusion made it through pretty quickly, but did get shut down by the Union in the upper bracket. The Union makes it through, but M80 had 2-0'd 9Z. Now, the Union and the Guard each got a free pass to the upper semifinals because of their seedings in the group stage. and both of them ended up 2-0ing their opponents. And then the Guard takes a 2-1 victory over the Union going into the grand final. M80 in the lower bracket, 2-0s Double O Nation, 2-0s 9Z, 2-0s the Union, and then loses to the Guard in the grand finals, which means the Guard qualified to VCT Americas 2024 and also 2025, and potentially more. But after this 2024 and 2025 season, there's going to be relegation tournaments. So the teams that win Ascension are going to have to battle it out with the teams that have already won Ascension in the past to determine who moves on and who gets knocked out. It's going to be a bit awkward like that. But for right now, this is where it ended up landing. And this does sort of affect the way challengers ended up functioning because we did end up seeing that if we come back here to 2023, we did end up seeing that a few teams ended up trading out here. So G2 ended up just buying the Guard because the Guard fell apart as an organization. For a little bit, for like a few weeks of time, it did look like the Guard was just gonna not even have a spot in tier 1 because Riot was not gonna allow them to be bought up at first. They were not gonna allow their position to be purchased, which was just really upsetting for a lot of people because the Guard made it very, very deep. Obviously, they made it all the way through challengers. They won Ascension, and then they were just gonna not get a spot. All of the players were just gonna be denied the spot, and eventually the organizer of tier 1 of the franchise league, eventually they were like, okay, you know what, fine, we'll let the Guard be picked up by another team, and G2 immediately took up that spot. G2 was supposed to be in the tier 1. They were supposed to be in the franchise league last year, but they did get kicked out of it because some of the stuff the owner did, and they ended up having to play through challengers instead, and they didn't do as well as they would have hoped. They got out pretty early in the lower round 2, so they decided to just buy the Guard, which is fair. So they took up some of those players, swapped out a few of those players, but that's not what we're here for. We're not here to talk about tier 1 because we are here for challengers. But that's why G2 is out of this tournament as well. And then we did see Shopify ended up combining with Moist Moguls. So during the off season, Moist and Shopify ended up playing. Some of their players ended up playing together in like the Knights Monthly Gauntlet. So just some like smaller tier 2 and tier 3 events that didn't necessarily mean as much. And Moist and Shopify both saw that and were like, well, let's just, our team is doing pretty well. Like they were winning those tournaments that they were competing in. So they were like, let's just combine our two teams. And so they did that. So they dropped some of their players combined, and now we have Moist Shopify, and they've honestly looked okay. They haven't looked amazing coming into this year. I wouldn't say they're bad, and they have started to pick it up. In the Ludwig and Tarek Invitational, they definitely put up a very solid performance, but it wasn't a winner's performance, unfortunately. So I'm still looking at them as a very powerful team. They were one of those underdogs coming into, or I'm looking at Moist Moguls, not necessarily Shopify, but Moist was an underdog coming into challengers during Split 2. They obviously had a very good run, and it looked like their playoffs was going to go very well as well. They just fell a little bit short, unfortunately. And so, they're coming into this year. I'm expecting some good stuff as well. I did question the decision initially to combine Shopify and Moist. I just didn't think it was going to go that well for them, and it didn't at first. And so I was sort of like, okay, I'm right here. But they did end up kind of closing it out at the end of last year in the Ludwig and Tarek. And so I have some hope, a little bit of hope, that they're going to be able to do something. Or not at the end. I think it was the start of this year when Ludwig and Tarek happened. I have really bad memory. But anyways, point is, they're looking okay. And they're looking well enough that I think they're definitely in contention. M80, I genuinely don't know. M80 right now, they've swapped out a few of their players. So they've got Nitro, they've got BCJ, they have Nismo, Xander, and Kuala were on the team previously. So they've swapped out a few of their players. Still have Happy as their coach, so they're still in a good spot, I think, in my eyes, as a team that's going to be pretty hard to beat. And it'll be interesting to see if they put up a good fight. They have not been playing in off-season events, so that's why I'm sort of like, there's this big question mark for me. They've sort of just been like gearing up towards challengers. They haven't been playing in off-season events. They don't want to show any of what they have. They just want to be playing in scrims, I guess, and sort of preparing themselves for this year, which is fair. I don't hold that against them, but that is still technically, that is still technically mean we have a big question mark for them, especially considering they did have a bit of a disappointing finish to Ascension, and they did swap out a few of their players. So I don't know necessarily how they're going to function with this new roster. I thought their previous roster looked good, but they did give up John Cutie to Sentinels, and now Sentinels is doing very well, or they have been doing very well in the offseason. So they've dropped. John Cutie is one of my favorite players on their team, obviously other than Koala Noob. So it's going to be interesting to see how this new head coach, or not head coach, new IGL in Nitro does function. So we'll see coming into this year. And then Oxygen. I do want to touch on Oxygen. They haven't made too many changes to their roster, but I will quickly show you their performance. They won the Ludwig and Tarek Invitational. They've pretty much always beaten Moist, except for once during the Ludwig and Tarek Invitational, but they came back to win it in the lower bracket. They won the Shangir Showdown. They won For Those Who Dare. They didn't quite win the Sentinels Invitational. They ended up losing to Sentinels, but they made it to the grand finals of that. They won For Those Who Dare, Open Qualifier number 1. They made it straight through to For Those Who Dare LAN, which, again, they won. They won the Knights Forge, which is another LAN event. And that's pretty much their entire off season here. It's a lot of green, right? If you saw this on your ranked career, you'd be feeling pretty good about yourself. So that's pretty much how they can feel about themselves coming into this year. So definitely looking pretty exciting. I am waiting patiently. Either it's a late start or I mean, I guess it just has to be a late start, right? I'm assuming they're gonna be streaming it. There's a chance they're not streaming it, and I'm just gonna look dumb. But I hope it's not that. If it gets to 2:30, I'll just cut to a break. But yeah, so that's the way these teams have been playing, and that's sort of the expectation I have for them coming into this year. So it should be pretty exciting. And oh, it does look like they've put in the qualifiers now. So it's just going to be its own thing on VLR then, I guess. Okay, interesting. So yeah, so here we have qualifier number 1. And stuff is happening maybe. Perhaps they're not streaming round 1, which would make sense because there's just not that many teams, because they planned for a bracket of 128 and they didn't end up getting 128 teams. Unlike last year, I believe they did have that many and more on like the backup list. But yeah, so lots of buy rounds. A lot of teams just get to skip round 1. So that's a bit interesting, I suppose. Probably could have, maybe lowered the numbers a little bit. Their expectations were a little bit high. But it's better to plan for more players and get less than you were expecting and have to do something like this than to plan for less players and then get more players than you were expecting, and then a lot of teams miss out. But yeah, so this is, I guess it's interesting that the qualifiers are separate. But yeah, so this is how this is going to function. Again, you can see you just have to make it through. Oh, I guess that's a round of 256. Wait, I don't think that's correct. Yeah, no, that's not right. No, actually it is. Oh, I see. Huh. Okay, so I guess it's a round of 256 because they had more than 128, maybe? I don't know. Maybe VLR is wrong, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But anyways, if you make it to the top 32, you qualify. So that's a lot of teams. So odds are if you've seen a team and you're looking forward to seeing them, they're probably going to make it through, right? Like there's good chances for them to make it through, just because there's quite a few spots right now. And then tomorrow is when it really gets exciting, with the whole lower bracket format and starting to play through. And this will just get to here, and so yeah, this will just get to the upper semifinals for both of them, and a little bit through the lower rounds too, I believe. So But yeah, I'm not really looking at too many other teams coming into this year. TSM, I believe, um, is currently inactive, but I do believe they had announced maybe they were going to be having some other players changed in and out. I can't remember too much. Um, Moist Shopify did release Thief, so they're going to be bringing someone else in, so that's something to note. I'm pretty sure though. Uh, I don't know. I can't remember. Um, but anyways, Split One. Yeah, there's not too many other teams I'm looking at. I assume TSM is going to have a team. I can't remember. They may have stopped playing, or maybe it was FaZe that stopped playing. Let me see. I don't know. We'll see what happens. FaZe was interesting because they ended up in this weird trade position where they traded a lot of players with Turtle Troop. It wasn't technically trading; it was FaZe wanting to buy a few of the Turtle Troop team players, and then they did because Turtle Troop is a free agent team, so they could just pick up the free agent players. And then the players that got replaced on FaZe went over to Turtle Troop. So we'll just see where it ends up heading with that, and then yeah, I think that's it. Obviously, Shopify Rebellion is giving up their spot coming into this year, but that does mean um, that they're still competing in the open qualifiers. It's just gonna be um, as Shopify Rebellion as their GC team. So not not as, let me see if I can find it. Not as their previous roster. They're not putting together a co-ed roster or just a typical challengers roster. They did decide to just enter in their GC team because their GC team is now going to be their full team, and they've done very, very well in champions. They did win it, so they've got a pretty good track record. They just competed in the open qualifiers for um, open qualifiers number one for game changers, and they did very, very well. I did not mean to just go straight back to this, and they did very, very well. But you can see, you can see in GC they've done pretty well. They almost lost to FlyQuest. They almost lost to Passion Project, but they did make it through. And then this is champions. They did end up beating everyone, and they won against Team Liquid 3-2. It was close, but they did do it. And then Knights Monthly, they do tend to struggle a little bit. They usually do pretty good. Obviously, this was a while ago. This was in October, so we don't have a whole lot of data since then. But typically, we do see a little bit of a tougher spot for Shopify sometimes in those co-ed tournaments like challengers. And so they did lose to Turtle Troop. Turtle Troop isn't competing in the open qualifiers, so their most recent loss in a co-ed tournament, that team's not even going to be here. So there's definitely that opportunity. If I had expectations, I would say I expect version one, or not version one, Shopify to make it through to. I'd expect them to make it through, possibly to the at least. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they qualify, if I'm honest, just because they are a very solid team. Um, but I also would not be uh, completely shocked if it went a different way. It hold on. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, it does look like some matches are happening, but they may not be streaming until the round of 128, which would be a bit annoying. But I guess that's fair. So I suppose I might just throw it to a quick little break until then. Um, which I do think is what I'm gonna end up doing. So I do apologize for having to do that, but I don't really see too many other options. I can keep talking, but I don't want to wear out my voice too quickly. So I think we will just give it a quick pause until 3. So we'll come back in 30 minutes, see where everything's at. It does say at 4, which makes me concerned. But to be fair, these are best of 3s. I don't know. We'll just throw it to a break and see how long it takes for us to come back. Honestly, if it gets to like three, I might just pause the stream. I mean, I'll just keep streaming. Just yeah, I'll just keep it live, but we'll throw it to a quick little yeah, we'll throw it to a quick little break, and I will see you guys once it gets ready to start. It should be a very exciting day, so don't miss out. We'll be back in a few hours. Alright guys, unfortunately, after pulling my sources and contacting a lot of the people I could, it does not seem as though there will be a stream today. I'm hoping there will be tomorrow because it's the start of double elimination. I'm hoping they do streams at all. I know they did them last year for open qualifiers. So I'm hoping this year they they at least do something, right? Like I know at least for Game Changers, Riot didn't give as much funding, so the organizer of Game Changers uh didn't have like a full stream going for the open qualifiers because Riot wasn't paying them for that. But they still did like an observer cam, like no casters, but there was still like a stream running where you could see some of the games. So I'm hoping maybe there's something like that at least, but it doesn't look like there's going to be any streams today. If that changes, find out that changes, then I'll let you guys know, of course. But for right now, I think this is going to be it, unfortunately. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Hopefully there are streams tomorrow. I won't start my stream until their stream starts, so that way I'm not in this position again. But I do apologize, and I will see you all. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.